Well, hey everybody, good to see you again. And tonight we're going to be taking a look at our next installment in the You Can Grow series. And this one is entitled Take Your Vitamins. So we're going to be taking a look again at fertilizer. We've had a lot of fertilizer questions over the last couple of weeks really. And we certainly have talked a little bit about fertilizers and some of the benefits and some information about how to use them. But I want to talk a little bit more today about some of the specifics of it. And really one of the things I'd really like to address is the organic versus chemical debate, if you will. And so there's always lots of talk about, should I use organic fertilizers, should I use the chemical fertilizers, is one better than the other, and I get a lot of that asked on a regular basis. So I thought I'd just deal with that today. And so just to start off, I hope, like everyone else in the world, that the organic and the chemical can get along. Right? So really, one can't do without the other. Okay? In many forms of gardening, you do need both. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what those are. When we use the terms organic and chemical and natural and manufactured, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what those mean, so I'd like to address those a little bit today, and hopefully you'll have a little more of a comfort level when you go into the store to know what you really need to do. Okay, so the first thing is plants, they're pretty simple. They like their meat and potatoes kind of supper. So they want nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash are their main three nutrients. We call those macronutrients. Okay, or the primary macronutrients. And those are the things for the green growth, the nitrogen. They're the phosphorus for the root growth, and the potassium for fruit and vegetable production. And those are kind of the things that we've talked about already in past videos. Okay, and those are standard. Now, where they get those from, the plant doesn't really know and doesn't really care. Okay, so in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, whether it's a chemical-based or a quote-unquote organic, we'll talk about that in a minute, it doesn't really matter. When we get to some of the other micronutrients, that might be a completely different story. Okay, so there's pluses and minuses to both these chemical-based ones and these organic ones, but really they're all kind of the same in many ways. So we just need to know what the advantages and disadvantages of them are. Okay, so as we get going, I'm going to start by talking about the chemical-based ones. Okay, so really when I talk about chemical, I'm talking about inorganic, which means it didn't come from something living. Okay, so for example, nitrogen. Nitrogen can be in the air, and it can be in minerals, and it can be a whole bunch of different products. One nice thing about nitrogen is that a lot of plants can convert it into a form that plants can use. Okay, so you're probably familiar with legumes and those kind of things that will fix nitrogen into a good form that can be used. And farmers, that's one of the reasons they lay their fields to fallow, to be able to get that nitrogen building up with those nitrogen fixing bacteria. Right, so that's a nice thing about nitrogen. Plants can produce that quite well. Phosphorus is not the case. Okay, there's really no natural process that produces phosphorus for a plant to access it. Okay, so a lot of us use things like bone meal as a natural source, but in the natural environment, it's not easy to find a plant source for for phosphorus. Okay, well, we'll talk about some of that as well. And yeah, so once we take a look at that, those things are the macronutrients. There's other secondary nutrients like calcium, magnesium, sulfur, okay, iron, and there's all sorts of micronutrients, like boron, and there's a whole list of manganese and all these other ones that become significant, especially when you're growing a lot of fruits and vegetables, even though we don't need very much of it. Okay, so let's carry on with our chemical fertilizers. So they're inorganic. They come from a material that is not living, but it's a mineral. Okay, typically it's been produced in a factory. So when we often talk about chemicals, we're talking about something that's manufactured or processed. Okay, and that often sounds bad, but in many ways it has some good connotations to it as well. Okay, so a manufactured fertilizer has two major advantages to it. Firstly, it is very clear as to how much of the fertilizer you're getting. Okay, so the analysis, that three numbers on the front, give you a really good idea of how strong each of those macronutrients are. And even the micronutrients, it'll show you a listing on the back of it that will give you some very concise information. Right? So that's one good thing to be able to have, is just know, okay, this is going to be exactly what I want. It's not going to be way out of line, and so I can use it quite with a lot of assurance that it's going to have what I want. The second thing about these is they're prepared in a way that they're quick access to your plants. Okay, so the plants don't always take up fertilizers very easily. And that's one of the drawbacks as we get into the organics that we need to talk a little bit about. Okay, so they can be slow release, okay, so we can produce a slow release chemical fertilizer, but a lot of them are produced so they quickly are taken up, and it's a nice efficient way to add those nutrients into your plants. Okay, so whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, or even any of the micronutrients, okay, many of those are quite easily taken up, and we know what we're working with. Okay, so those are some of the benefits to the mineral ones. One of the major drawbacks is there's not an awful lot of micronutrients, and there's not an awful lot of soil building or soil enriching materials in there. And that's just the nature of how they're produced. Okay, they have a certain purpose. They are supposed to produce a certain amount of those nutrients and nothing else. Okay, so they're kind of this meat and potatoes, and then we need to fill in the blanks with some of the other things that we might have in our repertoire. Okay, so let's move over into the organic type. So by organic, we're talking something that came from something that's living. So typically, it's plant or animal based. Okay, and again, we've got lots of sources for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, as well as all those micronutrients as well. Okay, so the thing with organics, as I mentioned, is they're complex, which means they need to take time to break down. They need bacteria to make those processes happen, and so they're not a quick release like the chemical fertilizers. So you have to treat them as a slow release and not really having an accurate idea of the concentrations. Now they're slow release, so you're not going to be worrying about burning, okay, but you are not going to put an organic fertilizer and see things burst into color or burst into green leaf as quickly as you would see with a chemical, okay, or chemical-based fertilizer. So you can see there's going to be pluses and minuses to both, and so we need to use these in conjunction with each other. And if you do it properly, you're going to get a happy plant, okay, and you're going to be at the same time enriching the soil. So the soil that you have, if you're just using chemical fertilizers, you're going to start to lose a lot of those micronutrients and those soil building bacteria, that kind of thing. Okay, so you should be always looking at your soil. What can I do to build it up, especially if it's in a garden or a bed that you're not replenishing an awful lot. Okay, so things like, I've got a bunch of bags on the side. So things like manure. Certainly you want to do composted manures. Okay, this is just a typical sheep manure that you carry. Okay, make sure it is composted because the fresh manure is pretty hot and it can certainly burn some of the small seedlings and plants that you have. Okay, other things. This is a mystery bag, but we have compost. Okay, so there's just a compost. Hopefully many of you gardeners will have your own composting bin or some way of creating compost. Okay, it's a great way to add organic material to your soil. Okay, fantastic source for all those micronutrients, lots of soil bacteria and things that will help to really enrich your soil, and little trace things that your plants need that they don't get from those chemical-based fertilizers. One other one. This is just a triple mix. It's called Garden Magic here. Really, this is compost, some manure, and a little bit of black earth and peat moss mixed together. So again, it's got a number of different things that just add some basic nutrients to your soil and help to enrich it. Now, are they going to be good enough to supply for a lot of the larger vegetables, or maybe you have a planter that has a high demand for flowering plants? Probably not. Okay, it's not going to be able to access it quickly enough, and really the nutrient value in these is quite low compared to those chemically based produced manufactured ones. Okay, so hopefully I'm making some peace between the organic and the chemical fertilizer people. So we're also seeing that in the market as well. So this is a Miracle-Gro product, okay, and it has an analysis on it. This one is, where are we here? 10.18.9. Okay, so very similar to a lot of the liquid Miracle-Gro all-purpose. Okay, and it has a pretty clear analysis, which means it has a lot of chemically produced fertilizers, okay, or manufactured, if you will. Okay, it's produced from natural minerals, and it's just used or processed to the point where we have a really good idea of what's in this bottle. But on this one, they've also added a number of organic elements. Okay, so they've added kelp. So kelp is kelp or seaweed is a really good source of potash. Okay, also it has worm castings. Okay, so worm castings are a really good source of a whole bunch of different micronutrients. Again, it's not a really strong source, but you don't need an awful lot of those micronutrients. So that's why it's nice to add this in here. We've also got some feather meal. Okay, so ground poultry feathers, that kind of thing. That is a good source of nitrogen, okay, a natural source of nitrogen. And they've also got some bone meal in here, okay, which we've talked about before, good source of phosphorus. Right, so we've got our chemicals and we've got our organics mixed together, and they seem to be pretty happy. They don't seem to be fighting too badly. So this one is a nice mix that's going to allow you to kind of address all of your soil's needs. All right. As we mentioned this before, I talked about the kelp or the seaweed. Okay, so we have something called Sea Magic, which is just a seaweed extract. Okay, good source of that potash if you're looking for something just to up the potash in your soil. Other sources for potash, just wood ash. Okay, if you got some wood ash, mix that into your soil, and that certainly will help. Here's another example of a plant-based fertilizer. Okay, so this is a Green Earth, or Earth-Safe product, and it has an analysis of 232. Okay, so low, but not too bad. And it's made out of fermented sugar beet molasses. Okay, so again, it's processed. So processing, you have to have a certain amount of processing, again, to make that available to the plants. Okay, the more unprocessed it is, sometimes it's a lot longer for the plant to develop the bacteria that will break down those products into something that the plant can use. All right, things like fish fertilizer, okay, like ground up fish and whatnot. This is a commercial product. It's fairly high in nitrogen. Okay, so we also talked about blood meal as a good source of nitrogen as well. Okay, so if you're growing green crops, maybe you're trying to get some corn going, these are always great to add in as a natural amendment. Okay, we talked about bone meal for the phosphorus, and so we've got quite a few options here. So in the end, I certainly want you to think of fertilizer as good, whether it's an organic meaning coming from living plants and animals, or whether it's that chemically manufactured mineral fertilizer. Both of them have some really good things about them. Both of them have some drawbacks. And if we can use them in conjunction, I think your plants are going to be really happy. All right, so I think that's it for today, and we will see you very soon. So happy gardening. Just remember, if you have any specific questions, we have Ask the Expert on our website, and feel free to pop into the greenhouses anytime if you want to get a little bit of spring. And also just remember, we have online shopping with our online store, as well as phone ordering. So we hope to see you sometime this spring in the greenhouses. Well, take care. We'll talk to you soon.